presentation. If anybody would like to have it when we are done, just let me know and I will get that sent out. So if anybody doesn't have anything preliminarily, one second. Then I'm just gonna go ahead and turn it over to Rennie and she can get started. Rennie, if you would introduce yourself, tell everyone where you are from and go from there.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Winter. And thank you for giving us the opportunity to be here and co-host this webinar together with you. I'm Franny Müller. I don't have a PhD or professor title, so my introduction is relatively short. I have been working with Berlinger, Swiss-based company for several years, and I'm now in the position of head of sales and marketing, Berlinger Special, which is involved in human and animal anti-doping. So I've been working in this industry for quite some time now. And I directly hand over to Professor Alison Heather so that she can introduce herself.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I know it's very early for some of you. So I'm Alison Heather. I'm a physiologist with a passion for understanding the molecular mechanisms of steroid hormones and how they impact health. My career has taken me from earning a PhD at the University of Sydney in Australia, leading research at the University of Otago in New Zealand, and to where I am now, a fellow at Lucy Cavendish College at University of Cambridge in the UK. So since 2004, I've been actively involved in anti-doping research, working to develop innovative ways to detect performance-enhancing drugs and basically protect the integrity of sport. This led to the forming of Insitugen in 2020, and that's the biotechnology company you'll hear a lot about today. Outside the lab, I'm an endurance athlete myself, having competed internationally in triathlons, including Ironman and the ITU World Championships. So it's this combination of science and sport that really fuels my commitment to fair play and integrity.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Alison. I will now share my screen so that everyone can see the presentation that we have prepared for today.
Brittany, if you could speak up just a little bit. I don't know if anybody else is having the same problems that I am. I have my volume all the way up. So if you could maybe just speak up a little bit, that would be great.
Okay, no problem. I'll do that.
Thanks. It's better, yeah.
Perfect. So advancing integrity in horse racing with First Flag X. In this webinar, we'll dive into androgen detection and explore how innovative methods can enhance the future of horse racing by advancing the analysis of androgens. Here's just a brief overview of today's agenda. We'll begin with a short introduction to set the stage. Since androgens will play a central role, we'll provide essential background information to ensure we all have a clear understanding of what they are and why they matter in horse racing. Building on that foundation, we'll look at the current regulatory framework surrounding androgens. Next, we'll dive into how androgen detection is currently approached in horse racing, which brings us to the core of today's presentation, where we'll introduce the innovative First Flag X analysis method and explain how it works. Once we understand the method, we'll explore practical ways it can be applied to support integrity and advance the standards in horse racing. Finally, we'll wrap up with a summary of some key insights from today's session. And of course, we'll open the floor for questions. So thank you very much again for joining us today. And let's start directly with some more introduction. I will shortly introduce the two companies that are collaborating to bring First Flag X to the market. Berlinger Special is a global leader in high security solutions for anti-doping efforts. Berlinger specializes in the production of security sample containers and has built a long-standing reputation for precision and trust. Serving as an ambassador for clean sports, Berlinger has been integral for the anti-doping community for both human and equine sports for many years now. InSituGen, as Alison already mentioned, is a biotechnology startup specializing in groundbreaking detection methods for steroid hormones. Their expertise, based on extensive research over many years in synthetic biology, has led to the development of First Flag X, revolutionizing hormone detection. Together, Berlinger and InSituGen combine decades of experience and innovation and are now addressing a pressing challenge in equine sports integrity and welfare, which is doping of horses with designer steroids. Over to you, Alison.
So we all know that androgens are basically involved in maintaining the sexual organ development and maintenance. They're produced in a number of different parts of the body, including the testes, ovaries in females, adrenal glands, and peripheral tissues. But beyond that role in the sexual organ development and maintenance, it plays a vital role in a number of other parts of the body. So it plays a vital role in brain health. It improves cognitive function and mood regulation. It also supports cardiovascular health by influencing blood vessel function and circulation. It's involved in the kidney production of EPO or erythropoietin. And as you know, EPO is essential for red blood cell production, which directly affects oxygen transport and overall metabolic function. And then they have a really strong role in maintaining muscle mass and bone strength, helping to prevent muscle wasting and conditions like osteoporosis. So while we associate androgens primarily with reproduction, it's this systemic impact that makes it a key factor in overall health and also in athletic performance. So there's several different forms of androgens. We have our endogenous androgens, which are our natural forms. So these are testosterone, dihydrotestosterone, DHEA, and these are produced in the body, and they're the things that are critical for muscle growth, recovery, and performance. But we also have exogenous androgens, and these exogenous androgens have been developed clinically to treat muscle wasting diseases, for example. And so these are synthetic substances that include anabolic steroids, or AAS as they're commonly known, and SARMs, which are selective androgen receptor modulators. And all of these are basically have been designed to improve or really augment the anabolic effects of androgens, so that muscle development, that bone strength, and having limited impact on the androgenic effects, those effects on the reproductive system. So all of these androgens can be important for athletic performance and also recovery. So androgens are just not, well, they're important for performance or athletic performance. They enhance stamina, they enhance strength. So the upshot is that you're going to get increased performance beyond natural limits that can distort fair competition. If athletes are overexposed or chronically exposed to androgens, this will lead to overtraining, pushing the body beyond its natural limits, including the recovery limits, and then that will increase the risk of musculoskeletal injuries and the long-term strain on the body. From a welfare standpoint, prolonged or excessive exposure to androgens can have serious organ damage. It can affect the heart, the liver, and the kidneys. These organs are under significant stress when you have an excess amount of any hormone, including androgens. Recovery processes will be disrupted if you're taking excess androgens, leading to fatigue, a weakened immune system, so more prone to infections, and then hormonal imbalances that complicate long-term health. And then finally, there's going to be behavioral effects that we have to consider from androgen withdrawal. That includes aggression if you're taking the hormones, and then anxiety if you withdraw from those hormones. That leads to unpredictable behavior, which is really a problem if you're dealing with a working animal. So our synthetic androgens, which is primarily these designer steroids that we're going to be talking about, and what we've developed the kit to address, are readily available in different forms. So we've got the ones that we know about: boldenone, nandrolone, stanozolol, and these have all been shown to enhance muscle mass, strength, and recovery. But the accessibility to these online veterinary supplements or nutritional aids is actually quite easy to get hold of, and hundreds of different synthetic androgens make their way onto the internet market every year.
So having explored the background on androgens, their applications and potential for misuse, it's essential to understand how this aligns with current regulations. Central to this discussion is the significance of a robust anti-doping program, which aims to ensure fair competition and safeguard equine welfare. A key component of such programs is effective testing to control the use of doping substances and medication. Implementing a smart testing strategy is crucial, and this targeted approach enhances cost efficiency and maximizes detection and deterrence. The introduction of First Flag X promises to elevate anti-doping efforts by improving detection capabilities and promoting compliance. An often underemphasized aspect is retrospective testing, which significantly bolsters anti-doping systems. This involves long-term storage of samples for future reanalysis as detection methods advance or new prohibited substances are identified. Valuable insights can be drawn from both human and equine sports regarding effective retrospective testing. A notable example is the reanalysis of samples from the London 2012 Olympic Games, which led to 73 newly identified anti-doping rule violations and the corresponding withdrawal of 31 medals only in 2022. So these comprehensive testing concepts strengthen the deterrent against doping and thus also the principle of a level playing field. To illustrate how androgens are incorporated into the anti-doping framework, we've prepared a little comparative table which demonstrates that regardless of the regulatory framework or agreement, be it ARCI, HISA, or IFHA, the message remains consistent. Androgenic substances are classified as prohibited at all times, both in and out of competition. This underscores the undeniable classification of androgens as banned substances within anti-doping framework. To effectively detect androgenic substances, it is imperative to conduct both in and out of competition testing. This comprehensive approach ensures the identification of these prohibited at all times substances through various methods. Direct detection utilizes techniques such as mass spectrometry to precisely identify androgenic compounds in equine samples, whereas indirect detection employs strategies like biological passports to provide insights into physiological changes and which are indicative of androgen use. Revolutionary analytical tools such as First Flag X enhance the ability to detect and monitor androgenic substances effectively. The detection of androgenic substances carries significant repercussions, including fines, suspensions, and disqualifications. The recent case of trainer Paul Valeri exemplifies these consequences. But beyond regulatory sanctions, the presence of androgenic substances in equine sports poses a risk to both the sport's integrity and animal welfare. Such incidents, or more likely, perhaps the late discovery of such incidents, can undermine public trust and raise questions about the credibility of the equine sports community. Furthermore, the administration of androgenic substances poses significant welfare concerns, as explained by Professor Heather, since undetected use can severely impact the health and well-being of horses. This not only harms the animals, but also tarnishes the sport's reputation, fueling doubts about its ethical standards. If we widen the focus a little further, it becomes clear that despite robust testing programs, challenges like contamination from feed and supplements persist, complicating anti-doping efforts. Therefore, it's essential to have the capability to test these supplements thoroughly, a process where First Flag X can be instrumental. Distinguishing between naturally occurring and externally administered substances remains complex, requiring sophisticated analytical techniques to identify irregularities. Additionally, the emergence of designer substances engineered to evade detection necessitates flexible testing to identify and deter the misuse of such compounds. Non-analytical violations derived from indirect testing, intelligence-led investigations, and whistleblower tips, etc., underscore the shared responsibility of maintaining sport integrity and highlight the need for innovative and almost creative approaches sometimes. Breaches that go undetected through testing until they surface through severe consequences such as fatalities can significantly damage the integrity of the sport, negatively impacting the legal betting market, discouraging sponsors, spectators, etc.
So I'm now going to just talk about how we currently detect androgens with the applications that we currently have. So at present, the analytical approach relies on the chemistry. So this is basically mass spectrometry, looking for known structures. So if you know the structure of an anabolic steroid, if you know the structure of a SARM, and you have reference material for the anabolic steroid or the SARM, you can screen for it with mass spectrometry. Often they don't, often they're not looking even for the parent compound, but the metabolites of those steroids. And again, you get reference material of the metabolite and you can pick it up with mass spectrometry. So basically you have a library that you go looking for. Testosterone itself can be detected with GCMS with that mass spectrometry approach, or simple ELISAs, an antibody antigen approach can also be used for testosterone. There are no ELISAs or very few ELISAs for any of the AAS or SARMs. So the type of sample that you can use this chemistry approach on includes blood samples, urine samples, hair samples, and when it comes to, for example, urine, the focus is primarily on the metabolites rather than that parent steroid. So when it comes to investigating whether a sample has an AAS or a SARM in that sample, if a horse has been doped, they'll take a urine sample, primarily, perhaps a blood sample, and they'll have a list of, every laboratory will have a list of AAS or SARMs that they screen for. And primarily this list is based on what they have the reference material for, that they can apply that list to that sample. They're primarily using urine samples where they're less likely to detect the parent, but looking for the metabolites. For testosterone, they'll use GCMS or ELISA. But what they can't detect easily at present are the unknowns. So there's hundreds of new designer steroids and SARMs that can appear on the black market every year. And we know this primarily from things that are being picked up at customs, like at the border of the entry into Europe or entry into the US or into Australia. And then investigative approaches then have to be used to identify these new designer steroids. So this is use of investigators plus science to try and find out who may be administering one of these new designer steroids or SARMs to their horse or to their animal athlete. And that investigative approach will use high resolution mass spectrometry or NMR to try and identify the structure of this new steroid. And that can typically take months to identify. So what we're basically looking at here is all targeted approaches. So you know what you're looking for and you go and identify it. So then that's where First Flag X comes into play. So First Flag X is not an approach for a targeted approach. This is what we call a non-targeted approach, where we're looking for any designer steroid. We don't need to know the structure. So First Flag X comes as a kit. It's something that has unique capability in that it can detect known and unknown androgens. So it can detect designer steroids, SARMs, regardless of their structure and regardless of whether we know of their existence. If they're in a sample, we'll be able to detect it. And basically, I'll show you some slides further down, but we've built this based on the synthetic biology. So I first got involved in anti-doping research back in 2004 when Don Catlin sent a sample of THG to the laboratory. And I used at that time a cell-based androgen bioassay to show that THG had androgenic activity. And this data was then used in the court cases that provided the sanctions for those athletes that were involved in the THG or the Clear scandal. So since then, since my first involvement in anti-doping research, I started visiting labs and getting involved with the anti-doping laboratories, primarily around the equine industry, and basically immersed myself into the laboratory to try and learn better how I could take this non-targeted approach of being able to show that there's androgenic activity in a sample and produce a technology that an anti-doping laboratory could use. Because in the current form, in that cell-based bioassay form, you basically needed a cell biologist and all this really expensive equipment to run it. And so that was just not feasible for anti-doping laboratories to use. So from 2004 really to 2014, I spent a lot of time in the anti-doping labs, learning as much as I could. And so I built this synthetic biology approach based on the biology of androgens. And just to take you through that really simply, any androgen, whether it's our endogenous testosterone or an anabolic steroid or a SARM, all act in exactly the same way. They all go into the cell, and once in the cell, they bind to a specific receptor. The androgen receptor shown here is AR. And once bound to that receptor, they then go into the nucleus and bind to the DNA. And once bound to the DNA, they interact with the gene expression machinery to switch on the androgen response. So for example, if that was a muscle cell, that androgen would turn on the androgen response, which is hypertrophy of the muscle cell, making it bigger. So basically what I wanted to do when I was looking at my cell-based bioassay, which is based on this cell biology, was to take that pathway and take it out of the cell and make it into more of a chemical reaction in a test tube. And so if you go to the next slide, that's pretty much what we've done. So now within the well of a 96 well plate, we've basically got the androgen biology signaling pathway. There are no cells, but we've got the DNA. So we've got the DNA, and to that DNA, the androgen receptor will bind at the androgen response element shown as the ARE. And so what happens now is if there's an androgen in the sample, the androgen shown in yellow will bind to the androgen receptor, and it will go down and bind to the DNA. But it can only bind to the DNA if it's been activated by the androgen. And so that androgen will be testosterone, it could be a SARM, it could be an anabolic steroid. And in that position, it sits on the DNA and it sterically inhibits an RNA polymerase from making an RNA. So from doing that gene expression response. And so in that instance, we don't get any RNA being produced. So if there is no androgen in our sample, what happens is that AR stays inactive. And so our RNA polymerase, and this is on the top line here, RNA polymerase will run along the DNA and it will produce our RNA. Now, our RNA is this really special molecule of RNA that in the presence of a fluorophore, they'll come together. And when they come together, it produces light, it produces fluorescence. And so we only get fluorescence when the RNA polymerase is allowed to produce the RNA. But if there's an androgen in the sample, it blocks that RNA. We don't get the RNA aptamer being produced, so we don't get fluorescence. So we get darkness. Basically, we're measuring darkness. And so this whole reaction comes in the kit in the form of a proprietary master mix. And that master mix you basically put into your 96 well plate, you add your plasma sample, and you incubate for up to an hour, and then you read your fluorescence output in a very standard fluorescence plate reader. So if you look at the next slide, these are the kind of results that we get. So what we did here was we took all of the race horses that raced across the New Zealand racing carnival in the spring. And we tested all of the horses for their androgenic activity. And so shown in black are all the basically all the horses that had low androgenic activity with the First Flag X kit. And what you see above are those that stood out from that had high androgenic activity. Now, we're not worried about anything in blue. So dark blue or light blue, we're not worried about because they're adult males, young males that will have testosterone. And so they will have high androgenic activity. But what you can see here are our yellow and orange samples, which was a young female, and our red sample, which was a gelding. And so these are represented as outliers using root analysis. And they tell you that those samples had higher than what we expected androgenic activity. And so these are the samples that then you would then take and throw all the different screening processes that you possibly have to find out what is in those samples. So again, we're just showing you the theory to practice here. So Hong Kong Jockey Club sent us some administered horses. We got horse samples. So we got the samples from the Hong Kong Jockey Club in a blinded state. So they sent us a bunch of samples. We didn't know which ones were administered, which ones were controls. And so after our analysis using First Flag X, we sent all our data back to the Hong Kong Jockey Club, and they produced what you're looking at. And so what you can see is that we were able to see pick up the oxyguno administered horse, and we were able to pick out the 6-oxo administered horse. So these are 2 designer steroids that were flagged by First Flag X. So what we have developed is what we call a non-targeted detection. So we'll be able to identify samples that have androgenic activity, even if they're from unknown or modified compounds. You can get results fairly fast. It's under 3 hours, but if you're in a hurry, you can actually do this whole test within an hour, hour and a half. You can run 88 samples at a time, if you like, or you can run less samples if you like. It's cost effective, pre-select samples for detailed analysis. So what we mean by that is, like I showed you in the New Zealand screening program, we screened a whole bunch of horses. We found 3 or 4 that showed an anomalous result, and that pre-selected the samples that then went on for detailed analysis. And it's just really helping with that perception of regulatory confidence. We're ensuring the integrity, compliance, and public trust by providing the first non-targeted detection for anabolic steroids. We can perform this test with very little capital investment. What you need is a fluorescence plate reader. These can be picked up from about 24,000 New Zealand dollars, which considering what it costs to buy a GCM or a mass spectrometer, it's pocket money. You just need a filter-based machine. You can use a multi-scan, but really just a filter-based machine, 96-well standard fluorescence plate reader. Apart from that, you just need very simple standard bench equipment, and preferably a technician that has some molecular biology training, because the volumes that we're using here are fairly small.
So now, after delving into the technology behind First Flag X, it's essential to consider its integration into anti-doping programs to ensure seamless alignment with regulations and maximize its effectiveness. We've identified several promising use cases for First Flag X, though this list is not exhaustive, of course. Earlier, I mentioned, for example, applications like biological passports and supplement testing. And now I'd like to highlight the cases we believe offer the most beneficial application, particularly in terms of ease of implementation. The most obvious use case might be implementing First Flag X in out-of-competition scenarios, ensuring comprehensive sample analysis and minimizing the risk of undetected substances. This approach is already in practice in laboratories across Australia and New Zealand. Next, we have the add-on to TCO2 testing, retrospective analysis, and sales house testing, which I will now explain in a little more detail. When we look at TCO2 testing, A blood sample is collected, which is already a match in the matrix for the analysis with first flag X. Typically, only a small portion of the sample is utilized for TCO2 testing, leaving the remainder unused. Given the inherent value of samples, of each sample, this unused portion represents almost something like a missed opportunity. And to maximize the utility of the collected sample, the residual blood can be employed for a first flag X analysis. This approach allows for screening the same sample for androgenic bioactivity without the need for additional sampling. By doing so, the initial costs associated with obtaining the TCO2 sample are leveraged to provide broader analytical coverage, enhancing the overall value of the sample and the efficiency of the testing process. As previously mentioned, examples from both human and animal sports underscore the importance and effectiveness of reanalysis, serving not only as a crucial tool, but also as a strong deterrent. In reality, not every sample stored in long-term storage can be reanalyzed due to cost constraints, as each analysis represents a financial investment. However, by using first flag X for initial screening across a larger pool of samples, we can not only identify those exhibiting suspicious indicators, but also broaden the range of samples analyzed. This approach allows for a more strategic allocation of resources, ensuring that only the most relevant samples undergo detailed analysis. Consequently, this not only optimizes reanalysis costs, but also significantly increases the likelihood of detecting substances that may have gone unnoticed at an earlier stage, whether due to previously unknown compounds or simply the lack of advanced testing methods at the time. Androgenic substances, including anabolic steroids and SARMs, are banned from birth in horse racing in many countries, but horses are not always subject to regulatory testing until closer to their racing debut. However, when purchasing a horse, it's essential for buyers to ensure that the horse hasn't been given any banned substance, because it directly impacts the horse's eligibility to race and helps protect the buyer from potential anti-doping rule violation for which they were not responsible. First flag X can be used as a first step screening tool for samples taken at the fall of the hammer. If the assay flags suspicious bioactivity, further analysis like mass spectrometry can be done to get final specific results. By using first flag X for initial screening, sales houses can provide a more cost-effective option, improving accessibility and offering greater protection to buyers who might otherwise avoid sales testing due to high analysis costs. These were now all real-life examples that show how first flag X can be integrated as additional tool in the armory into your program to enhance cost effectiveness, strengthen detection and deterrence, and ensure a level playing field. As some of Ed's reports suggest, most of tests in racing return negative results, providing evidence that the sport is relatively clean. Even with these tests, many results may still be negative, which in my opinion at least is a positive sign, but its true value lies really in covering a broader range of substances that some might attempt to use. Additionally, its deployment combined with robust communication further enhances deterrence and reinforces integrity in racing. So now let's summarize some key takeaways. Androgenic substances not only provide unfair competitive advantages, but can also be highly harmful, both during and also after administration to horses. The issue of designer steroids is a growing concern as they are specifically engineered to evade detection. Every year, new designer steroids emerge, making the challenge even greater. Just two examples of such compounds designed to bypass traditional testing methods are DMT and THG. To address this problem, First Flag X offers a powerful solution. Instead of like only detect known substances, it identifies the unknown. This capability is possible because First Flag X does not search for specific known chemical structures. Instead, it detects abnormal androgenic bioactivity, making its detection scope virtually unlimited. This innovative approach strengthens anti-doping programs, enhances regulatory compliance, and ultimately reinforces the integrity of the sport. The analysis with First Flag X is relatively straightforward process, notable for its speed and efficiency, delivering results in less than 3 hours, sorry. Implementing such a comprehensive screening method serves as a deterrent to potential abusers. This not only upholds the integrity of the sport, but also promotes the welfare and health of the horses. If you're interested in utilizing the First Flag X analysis tool, it's essential to coordinate with the laboratory conducting the analysis, but additionally, we are available to answer any questions you may have. So therefore, feel free to contact me at your convenience. On the slide, you can see my email address for reference. By scanning the QR code provided, you can fill out a brief feedback form and, if desired, share your contact information for a one-to-one discussion. We would really appreciate if you could take the opportunity during the Q&A session to complete the form. And for those unable to scan the QR code, the link will now also be shared in the chat. So yeah, that's it. Now I invite you to ask any questions you might have. Thank you very much also again for attending. So we have Petra Hartmann. I think you can just unmute and go forward.
Yes, thank you very much. As mentioned, I'm Petra Hartmann. I'm the lab director for Industrial Labs. And thank you for your presentation. I'm definitely interested in learning more about your screening detection kit. And I apologize in advance for the question that I'm about to ask you because I'm a little confused. I thought today's presentation was to be an introduction to ion mobility mass spectrometry. I'm kind of missing the connection between the kit that you have introduced us to, which does seem like an interesting screening tool, but I'm not quite catching on to how this relates to ion mobility mass spectrometry.
I think, Alison, that's certainly something for you to answer.
All I can say is that it doesn't have anything to do with the mass spectrometry at all. I'm not sure how that mixed message got
Yeah, I don't know either.
So yeah, this is all about the synthetic biology approach of the kit that we've just discussed.
Okay, I was wondering if there was confusion about that. So if you don't mind, I'd like to ask you a couple of questions about the kit. You have certainly introduced a number of applications for which this androgen bioactivity kit would be suitable. However, one thing that as a screening tool is generally missing is legal defensibility of the findings. So if this were used in a sale or pre-race setting, really you would not be able to undo a sale or keep a horse from racing based on the results of this testing. We would still need to identify the actual compound causing the androgenic activity and provide legally defensible data to have any sort of regulatory outcomes with this. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So what this is a companion test, a screening test that will allow you to screen samples for anomalies and then allow you to then go to those anomalous samples and find out what's in them. So yes, you're right. We're a screening tool by itself. Nobody is going to sanction anybody unless you can say this sample has X compound in it. But we will, with First Flag X, you'll be able to screen a whole lot more samples cheaply to find out which samples you should go after. And
Right.
that's what a non-targeted test is, to allow you to have the width of screening before you go to the depth with your NMR or mass spectrometry approaches.
Right. And that's certainly a desirable characteristic. Have you validated the kit using known administrations of anabolic steroids in horses to determine the sensitivity, I guess, if you will, of your detections?
Yep. So I showed you the Hong Kong laboratory data. We've also done administered samples from the Australian labs, New Zealand labs, the England lab or LDC. Yep. So the labs that we've worked with, they've all provided us with administered samples blinded so that we could pick it up for them to see if we could pick up the administered samples versus non-administered samples. And to date, we haven't failed at picking up an administered sample, regardless of what the SARM was or the anabolic steroid was that the horse was administered. In addition to that, we've gone through and tested 88, I think we're at now, different SARMs and anabolic steroids to show that by themselves we can detect them.
Right. That's great. So to clarify further, and I do apologize, I realized there was some confusion as to what today's presentation is, so I don't mean to ask you questions that you may not be able to answer, but just to clarify then, your kit is specialized for androgen activity. We're not talking about detection capabilities for, say, various stimulants or unknown, designer drugs of abuse that are coming in across the borders. For your kit, we are specifically talking about androgen activity.
Yeah, well, at the moment, the kit is targeted towards any designer androgen. Yeah, so
Okay.
nothing else yet. Watch this space, but right now just androgens.
So if a lab, and I apologize if I'm hogging the spot, if anybody else wants to jump in, I have a lot of questions. If we were to use your kit and we had, say, a hit on something, what is your recommended next step for determining the actual potentially unknown anabolic steroid? How would we go about determining which one is actually causing the androgenic activity?
Yeah, so I've got experience with this with the labs that we've worked on. So the ones that give us a hit, the first thing that they do is they use their entire reference library for anabolic steroids and SARMs to see if it's anything like anything that is known, for example, and they'll often send a sample to another lab because they have a different list of reference material. They have a different for both anabolic steroids and SARMs. So they'll start there, and then after that, they'll go to high resolution mass spectrometry and look for fragmentation profiles and piece it together that way. And that's how they've been able to identify what's causing the positivity.
Right. So that's a fairly common workflow then. Would you say that this is suitable for pre-race screening? Would you be able to do everything that you just described within a couple of hours before a race?
Do you mean the first flag X? Can we do that in a couple of hours?
No, I mean the whole process from using first flag X to having a hit on the kit and then having to determine the actual compound causing the activity. Would you say that is something that can be done in less than 3 hours?
I don't know the GCMS workflow, so how long that would take a lab to do. My understanding is they batch and do samples together. So I don't know. First flag X can definitely be done before a race. Could definitely be done for a race. So you could actually flag a suspicious horse, but you would do the investigation after the horse's race, I would imagine.
Right. And most of the racing labs that are currently doing this type of analysis actually are doing LCMSMS, and HRMS is part of the routine workflow. So in terms of, you mentioned that in order to detect an unknown analyte that is causing a reaction on first flag X, we would have to check our libraries. So in that sense, it's basically something that is already being done in most workflows. In the labs that you have worked with, have you identified any previously unknown anabolic steroids?
Previously, we've detected samples that are positive that particular lab has not tested for, but when they've sent it off to another lab who has a different library that they test for, they've been able to identify what it is. We've yet to pick up a completely new steroid.
Gotcha. Thank you very much, Dr. Heather. One last question. I promise that I'm done. How much does your kit cost?
Rani, I'll send that over to you.
Yeah. I mean, that's specifically the question I expect from a laboratory, because afterwards laboratories would add their charges to sell it to the regulators. But the kit itself, that the cost for it is something around $35. I mean, per test.
Per test. Okay.
Yeah.
So the actual plate is more along the lines of about $3,500 to $4,000 per kit.
Yeah, something around 3,000 is per kit, 3,000 around this per kit, because you have then 88 tests inside it.
Okay, great. Thank you for the clarification, and I apologize for the barrage of questions.
Thank you very much for asking. So then I assume Mary Robinson, you have some or one question as well.
Thank you for leaving me some time, Petra. Very nice presentation. I love that you're going for the actual downstream pathway that the drugs are targeting. I'm a veterinary pharmacologist at the University of Pennsylvania, and I'm the director of the Pennsylvania Equine Toxicology and Research Laboratory that also performs drug testing for horses racing in Pennsylvania. I see what you're trying to do as far as using this as a screening test to identify anything that is going to then have an impact on that androgen receptor and cause it to have downstream effects. My concern is the data that you showed, or my question, I should say, is the data that you showed for the administration samples from Hong Kong. It looked like the longest detection time was less than 40 hours. I don't know if you want to go back to that slide, but when you were just answering one of Petra's questions, you mentioned that you haven't failed to detect an administration. However, that depends quite a bit on the amount of length of time between when the drug was administered and when the sample was collected. So can you expand a little bit on what samples were actually tested for these administration studies and how far out from the administration you were able to detect it with your kit?
Yep. So it all depends on the steroid we're trying to detect, right? So at the moment, so if something is very metabolizable, and so we use blood samples. So if it's something that is metabolized quickly, yeah, after 48 hours, 72 hours, it's no longer in the blood, so we can't detect it. And then that's just the nature of biology. However, if a sample is stable and doesn't get metabolized as quickly, we're able to detect it out to 4 or 5 days after the administration. So it all depends on the actual steroid that we're looking for. And that's why our test really lends itself to out of competition testing, where it's random. So you don't, if they've administered it the day before, the 2 days before, you're going to catch them. So it's all that random testing, that biological passport testing, but also race day testing for the designer steroid that they think they can get away with. And so they're still using it even on race day, which, you know, a couple of the SARMs we've picked up have been on race day, not out of competition. So I think that answers your question quite well. Yeah.
And that the other question I had was, you mentioned using it for pre-race testing. So obviously there are naturally, there are natural levels of androgens that are going to give a signal. And you showed some population data that you mentioned this from the New Zealand Carnival. How much population data do you have? Have you looked to see what the effect of racing is on the response, if there is a difference between pre-race versus post-race? And the other question I had was about the cutoff value. Is there a cutoff value that comes with the kit that is recommended? And if so, how was that cutoff value determined?
Yep. So across New Zealand, Australia, where a lot of our population data has come from, the horses that race are primarily geldings and mares. And so the cutoff value is quite low for those particular, for those sexes, right? So, yep. So, and in terms of how much data, like we're in the thousands of horses now that we've got the data for. We've gone to Europe primarily. LCH provided us with a whole lot of samples so that we could increase our stallion population. Pre-race, post-race, we do see fluctuations in the stallion testosterone concentration, and so the androgen bioactivity does fluctuate. What we recommend for stallions is, because they do have the androgen bioactivity naturally inherent, we do what we call bivariate analysis. So we plot testosterone on the y-axis and androgen bioactivity on the x-axis. And so if a horse is administered an androgen, it suppresses their HPG axis, so they don't produce testosterone, so it's low. But if they're taking a steroid, the bioactivity is high. So that pops out really, really clearly. So yeah, so we've tried to cover every yeah. Like I said, I spent a lot of time in the equine laboratories learning what they need, and then built the kit based on what they need, and built the data based on what they need, rather than what an academic sitting in a university thinks they need. Yeah.
So typically, I think when we implement these tests and cutoff values and those sorts of things, to be able to defend them legally, we do have to have, publications and show that it's been accepted by the scientific community. Are you planning to publish any of your data or present at like ICRAF, for example?
Yeah, so I've presented at ICRAF twice now. The last two ICRAFs I've presented at. I've also published the methodology in drug testing and analysis, and another publication will go out this year with the latest data. So yeah, we're all over that. Yeah.
Yeah, if you could supply those, I would really appreciate seeing those. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think that's all my questions.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Do we have questions from anyone else?
Okay, well, we want to thank everyone for coming and attending. If anyone would like a copy of the presentation, either email me, message me, whatever, I will be happy to send those out. I want to thank Professor Heather and Rennie for doing this today, and thank you again for all for attending.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Too.
Thank you.
Thank you very much as well for having us and for participating.
Thank you. Great presentation.
Very good.